Hello, everyone, and welcome to another virtual CANNAtalk session. And first, I would like to thank CANNA for organizing events like this and being leaders in educating, supporting, and developing our industry. This is an interactive session, and we encourage participants to submit questions that we will take as the session is ongoing. So please feel free to use the comment box and add your questions. If you're afraid to leave your name, you can leave the question anonymously. So please send your question along. We have these experts here for the second time for a reason. So we've also have some questions that came in ahead of time. But if you're watching on the CANNA website, you should see a Q&A box just below your screen, and where you can type in your question. And if you want to use the QR code up on the right-hand side, you can use your mobile device, scan it there, and use your phone to do the same thing. So for this discussion, as I mentioned, we brought back the great lineup from our panelists we had back in July to continue the conversation on the state of our industry, the potential for international markets, and instead of barriers of entry, we decided we dive into the different paths to exporting product. So on the panel today, we have Deepak Anand. He's the principal at ASDA Consulting Services. ASDA is a business consulting service providing management and strategic business development consultancy services to the global cannabis industry. We have also Sean MacDougall, head of production and procurement at EastCann Craft. They are a small group of legacy growers situated in the city of Lakes in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And with over 20 years of experience, their focus is and always has been premium quality cannabis. We have Chad Esch, the master grower and the head of production at Safricanna, a South African cannabis company whose efforts are focused on the growth, cultivation, processing, and export of medicinal EU GMP cannabis products to international markets. And lastly, we have Tanner Stewart. He's the CEO at Stewart Farms, a unique cannabis and wellness company located in the picturesque border town of St. Stephen, New Brunswick, adjacent to the stunning Bay of Fundy, and they have a passion for the plant, helping people feel better, and Mother Nature herself. If you want more details on our panelists, please click on the invite where you can find all their full bios and company profiles, and I highly invite you to do so. So let's jump into this conversation. And I'd like to start with Sean, because Sean, last time when we were discussing this, you mentioned your approach to exporting cannabis. And if you could just kind of recap a little bit what your company does and how you have your co-op, and how do you do your co-op, and then how do you control your production for quality and consistency when you rely on other growers, and how all that works?
Okay. Yeah. So since the last time we spoke, we've actually increased our footprint in growing capacity and also in the EU GMP area. So we've taken on another facility in Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia. So like 11 minutes from the Dartmouth location, and it's EU GMP facility. And we have some grow rooms here as well, and a great staff. Everything is ticking along great here, and so we've expanded our rooms now. And so, going back to what we were saying before, I guess about working with micros and smaller LPs, and growing the same genetics and trying to fill the voids where they're needed. And I find with the quality, that's a good question. Is we'll have three different growers growing the same genetic. One may be in living soil, one may be in rock wool, one may be in cocoa, and they all have their own styles and ways of going about it. In the end of the day, we'll have those three products, and we'll pick. Basically, we pick our highest THC for domestic, and then basically the other batches, if they're between, say for instance, if it's a plus 30% cultivar, and then we have a run that's 29, it just sells differently in the domestic market if it's 30 or 29. Whereas in the international market, we find it works just fine. So there's a spot for all the cannabis, and that allows us to keep the relationship going. We're not leaving the grower holding the bag with the product. It's always going to have a spot for it instead of just having the one lane for them to go to. So it's a desirable way for those guys to be able to, or girls to be able to, feel safe about knowing that they're growing a product that there's a spot for.
So, okay, so what you're saying essentially is having different avenues, different lanes of products. So the bigger your network type of deal, the easier it is to participate in your type of business.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly.
Okay, excellent. Chad, what do you see as the biggest hurdle for a GMP facility? And I don't mean on the certification side of things, because we kind of touched on that. I'm more into like moving your product or determining how quality is perceived, or do you find there's a challenge with different countries? Because I do believe you guys are exporting to Germany, Israel, Australia. So there's different standards, let's call them. Is this something difficult to achieve? And did the EU GMP resolve all of that? Because I know you also participated in the export prior to being certified.
Yeah, so I think one of the most difficult things is actually just getting to the point where you understand what the requirements are from a regulator's perspective, and kind of navigating their lack of understanding when it comes to cannabis, because the way they see it is more pharmaceutical at the end of the day. So the way they define quality is whether or not your COA meets the requirements, right? So there's certain things that they test for, and there's certain products that we cannot use because they get tested for, and it's not the things that you would expect that they would put restrictions on, right? Like they make it very difficult for you to use any sort of organic products, any biological products. And I'm not saying you can't produce good quality cannabis without it. I'm just saying that there's a lot of products that you could use that would be a lot easier, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the biggest hurdles. And then the second thing I would mention is probably the timelines. So there's a very big lack of understanding as to what it takes to become EU GMP, and things that restrict you are validations. So you would have to validate all of your processes, all of your equipment. And then there's things like stability data, which is also going to stop you from being able to produce and sell your product in certain markets if you don't have that. And that takes months to achieve, if not years. And we all know cannabis it's an agricultural biological product. So to achieve stability is not easy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know I learned this just recently that in South Africa, you need to have a pharmaceutical, is it a pharmacist or just a pharmaceutical rep that has to be on the license? And how does that impact the like the operations in regards to moving product? How are they involved on the international market? Is that just for South Africa, or is that the EU GMP requirements?
Yeah, so that's basically a European requirement. It's basically a responsible pharmacist in Europe. They refer to it as a qualified person. So it's basically the person that's taking full responsibility of what happens with the product. So at the end of the day, if there's an adverse reaction with a patient, and it's because of the product, then that person who is our responsible pharmacist or qualified person would be liable. So they really take the biggest risk at all. And because of that, they're very involved in every single process to ensure that the product is safe to be consumed and that you haven't sort of gone off track when it comes to requirements. And
Very interesting.
to answer your question in totality, it's something that you cannot avoid. It's something that you have to have, and it's someone that you need in place for you to be able to get your EU GMP certification.
Interesting. And that's something that I think most Canadians are not aware of. And
Sorry,
Deepak, I'm going
I
to
was going to steal.
yeah, go ahead, Tanner. Absolutely.
Can I dig? I'm going to steal your thunder a little bit here, Nico. Can I dig into that a little more? Now, when you say qualified pharmacist, is it qualified pharmacist or qualified person? Does it have to be a pharmacist specifically, or there's alternatives in that position?
No, so it has to be someone that is a registered pharmacist, because the way that they look at it is we basically dispensing medicine, right? So it needs to be someone that has an understanding of what they need to do to be able to dispense medicine or sell medicine. It's just a different term. So in South Africa, we refer to them as a responsible pharmacist, and in Europe, they refer to them as a qualified person. And for you to be a qualified person, you need to be a registered pharmacist.
Thanks, Chad.
Interesting.
And great question, Tanner. I know you're itching to speak, so I have some questions for you. Don't worry. Deepak, kind of, let's say a company acquires their GMP status. What are some other consideration, like more so on the risk that they need to consider? Because you mentioned last time, a couple of times, that you said the EU GMP is not your golden ticket. There's other things that come into play. So what are some of these other consideration to look at? So we've gotten the GMP, now what?
Yeah, so just picking off something that Tanner and Chad kind of briefly touched on, I think the fundamental difference, particularly for a North American audience listening in, is, from a Canadian or a US perspective, we've turned cannabis as medicine, but then failed to regulate it accordingly, right? So what I mean by that is that, it's regulated through GPP standards in Canada, and the US states, they have a very different standards. But the bottom line is it doesn't go into pharmacies. Like, you wouldn't be able to go into a Shoppers Drug Mart here. You wouldn't be able to go into a Walgreens in the US and pick up your product. Whereas in Germany and South Africa and some of these other countries that have legalized it, you can actually go into a bricks and mortar pharmacy. And to reverse engineer that from a supply chain process, what that means is you have to go through the GMP setup that Chad was talking about. And Chad also mentioned stability. I mean, stability is certainly one aspect of the supply chain. But then depending on different countries, there's different requirements. So for example, if you're trying to launch your product into the German market, as an example, stability is certainly one thing you need to keep in mind. The next is going to be, how are you going to supply the pharmacopoeia, and how specifically are you going to make sure your microbial count is, as low as the German kind of monograph requires. So in order for you to be able to register your product, you need to conduct typically irradiation in most cases. And for irradiation, you need to have a specific certificate. And to apply for that certificate, there's a significant wait, right? So it takes 8 or 9 months for something called an AMRAD 5 permit in Germany. So you really, really need to focus on which market that you're going to be targeting and what are all of the regulatory kind of nuances. In Denmark, as an example, you don't need to have that irradiation certificate, but you have a separate pesticide requirement. So it's really, really nuanced, and it really boils down to traditional pharmaceuticals. And because it's going through and being dispensed through a pharmacy, various countries have different legislation. And alongside GMP, you need to understand what are those different regulations that you need to comply with. And it really varies from country to country.
And with the recent announcement of Germany, can you explain a little bit what has happened recently in the last couple of weeks? I think there was some big announcement in Germany in regards to the regulation and how that could potentially impact us, the Canadians, or the export market.
Yeah. So significant amount of sort of news has been coming out of Germany for the greater part of the year now, I'd say. Where Germany has landed most recently, I won't bore the audience with sort of the details around what's happened and what's changed, but where things have landed is really two things, I think. First and foremost, most importantly for the audience and for people that are focused on the medical cannabis market, Germany is looking to move cannabis from the pharmaceutical side out of the narcotic element. So currently it's considered a narcotic drug. They're looking to move it out of that category. That is expected to happen this year. And most noticeably for the cannabis industry as it currently stands, that shift is going to be quite significant, because what that now means is, any doctor can prescribe. You get into a variety of other conditions to be able to be prescribed that product. Also, from an importation, a storage, or distribution perspective, because it's now no longer being considered a narcotic, the barriers to entry, or the thresholds to be able to get into the business are going to be much lower. So it's definitely going to open up from a patient perspective. You're going to see medical cannabis numbers go up significantly. At least that's the expectation, once more and more prescribers start to get comfortable and prescribe this non-narcotic product now. So I think that's probably what the industry should most be excited about. There are two additional things that have come out. They've got two pillars to their proposed legalization model, of which the first pillar has been announced, and that's going to be a social club model. So what Germany is going to do is going to allow people to be able to set up not-for-profit clubs, much like you see in Barcelona as an example, or in Spain, and you can access cannabis. It's still going to be a not-for-profit system. There's going to be limits on sort of how many plants people can grow, for what purposes, and where they can sell it and consume it. Also, home grow is going to be permitted for non-medical purposes. So those are sort of the first pillar that's been announced. And then the second pillar is, of course, a more phased out traditional legalization approach, which there isn't a lot of details on. One important thing to keep in mind, of course, is because Germany is within the European Union, there are EU things that need to go into play here, and the EU needs to approve this entire process. So that will be something that has to be looked at as well. So it's a really a phased up sort of scaled up legalization model that's happening in Germany. But to me and to people in the industry, I think the medical cannabis shift away from a narcotic is perhaps the most important element of the recent developments. Because again, keep in mind, from an import-export perspective, cannabis can only be shipped for medical and scientific purposes. You cannot export or import recreational cannabis. So really what happens on the recreational side is perhaps less interesting than what's happening on the medical side to a number of people on this call and here.
Really interesting last point that most of us do forget, Deepak. It's very well regulated under the medical system in most countries, unlike Canada. It is not a free willy-nilly market yet, hoping that we get there one day, but we have to abide by the different regulations. So thank you for having those details, Deepak. Really insightful for our listeners. Tanner, you are now GMP, but it's not EU GMP, but you have a GMP certification. How much has that impacted your day-to-day business in regards of intrusiveness? And is this going to take precedence on your business moving forward?
Yeah, well, it has definitely increased the administration burden within the company. Not significantly, because again, it's not too far away, I would say, from how we were operating already, but I would say it is a decent distance away from the requirements of EU GMP.
Okay.
So it definitely has increased the overall workload in our quality control department specifically. I wouldn't say that it has impeded production whatsoever. The things that have added to our workload and our export relations to Australia are the microbials. Actually, we like Sean and his team at EastCann. We have partners. Microcultivators that we work with, and dealing with a lot of the same challenges of aligning a few different growers growing the same genetics, and trying to make sure we aren't sending, it's really hard to send a jar of living soil grown product and then a jar of hydroponic grown product into the same market. I guess it can depend on the genetic, of course, but a lot of times you're going to want to segregate those completely and not have them alternating in the markets. And then the other thing you're doing when you're working with contract partners is you might be trying to get them up to your standards. So we've run into, we lost Deepak. Yeah, we've run into some situations where we've had to get some irradiation done via Australian standards for one of our micro partners, but not in Canada. They would have been fine in Canada. It would have stuck with the non-irradiated kind of situation. So for us, beyond our internal management of our GMP system, well, now we're going, okay, well, we've got to step in to our partner's farm, because we know that with just a couple little extra tweaks and a few extra steps, that we can get them to the same microbial level as us, because we're passing every time in our own farm. So it just adds all this extra element of management, and when you throw irradiation, I mean, our anchor point is, we've never put anything out domestically in Canada that has come out of our farm that's been irradiated, and you don't want to have to irradiate in markets like Germany. To Deepak's point, you probably have to, because their tolerance is next to nothing. But when you're adding in all that shipping and logistics, and in one case we had somebody drive right to Montreal and wait outside the facility, and then it got irradiated. We had them drive back with the product, right? So you just have these added logistical issues that you really have to manage when you're exporting, things that you might not have to worry about domestically that you have to worry about internationally.
Thank you for that. But just in short, I just want to make sure that I got that good little tidbits that you are able to grow crops without irradiation and passing micros in Canada, correct?
That's right. To the Australian market, for sure, with their microbial limits. Yeah. Within Canada and the Australian market, but I can't speak to what the German requirements are. I'm just assuming probably not, by the sounds of it.
And you say that is because of how do you achieve that the non-irradiated product and still passing micros?
Well, it could be as simple as how the samples are handled and taken, right? So there's it takes so little to throw a test off, right? So of course, what's the number one, thing to focus on in growing is cleanliness of your grow rooms and plant health, right? If you have a healthy plant, then you're probably not going to have any issues in your grow. If you have a very clean grow, that's a very good start on your journey to having a very healthy plant throughout its life cycle. But I'll go through some of the things that we've done. So right from day one, we always wore masks in the room, always. So it wasn't a COVID thing. It's a don't breathe on the plants type of thing, right? Because where does bacterial load come from? Right here, right? So we all wear masks when we're in the room. We never touch a plant with a bare hand, right? Now, always wear a glove. We're living soil farmers, which makes it even more significant that we, are always passing our microbials. Well, we have microbes in the soil, okay? So when you water, if you happen to be hand watering or you're irrigating or however you're watering, you just want to make sure that you're not splashing the surface of the soil up onto the bottom, or you're not doing anything to really, throw any of those soil-based microbes into the air, right? And then right to your room turnover and how you're going to clean, and in between transitioning the new plants into that room. And then the final step is, when you're taking your samples, what if you took your samples and you didn't wear your mask? So your whole crop was good. Like you were good. Yeah. And then your sampler went in and didn't wear his mask or his or her mask and grabbed the sample and went, "Oh, looks good." That sends it off to the lab, right? You might fail your microbial. So it's all those little nuanced things, right?
Being very aware of contamination points. Like I think you've mentioned quite a few good ones. So thank you for that. Just a reminder that there is open Q&A. These are experts that have been doing this for quite a few years. So please, if you have questions, slide them in. Deepak, I don't know 100% if this number is accurate, but this is a number that's been going around the Canadian industry. 1 gram sold for every 7 gram grown. If that is truly the case, do you think that participating in the international market is a necessity for us Canadians to actually survive, or is this just short term? And I think we've touched a little bit on that because some people are just trying to pay the bills. What's the play here if it truly is that production level in Canada?
Yeah, look, I think that there certainly is a tremendous opportunity that Canada has to be a leader in the international stage, right? I think we were the largest exporter for cannabis in 21. I think we have been the largest exporter in 22 and will be in 23. I think going into 24, 25, 26, we're going to have a lot of competition, right? I think that when you look at places like Colombia or Portugal or even Australia and New Zealand or South Africa or Uruguay, the list of countries keeps increasing. And along with the increase in just cultivation licenses and the expertise in these countries, you're also starting to see trade and promotion arms of these countries really kick in, right? So I was in Berlin at ICBC a few weeks ago, and there was an Australian tent, and you had the government of Australia supporting their cannabis growers and their industry. And you had a New Zealand tent, and you had the New Zealand government, and this is the trade commission arm of these countries, that was there with tents supporting their industry. And it was obviously noticeably absent from a Canadian perspective because, our trade offices, which we have across the world, it's not that we don't have those, and they support every other industry. There's really been an absence of support from a Canadian government perspective on this. And so I think the industry can certainly do a lot, but sometimes it can only do so much. And having that support from the Canadian government would go a long way to assisting companies that are looking to export, right? I mean, export is usually a completely different kettle of fish for any industry, leave alone a highly regulated industry like cannabis. And so to the extent that we can get support on the international stage, I think that is vital for our continued success on the international stage. But I think it could be a really viable route for a number of companies. As you said, I don't know if it's going to necessarily solve the overproduction or oversupply issue, because I think we also have some quality issues in this country that we don't often like to admit to, but certainly that is an element. And I don't think an overseas market is going to be a dumping ground necessarily for poor Canadian cannabis. However, I think there is a tremendous opportunity for good quality product on the international stage. I do think it needs to have some support from our government, else I do also see us losing that first mover tremendous opportunity that we've had since 21.
Interesting. Very interesting. So the lack of government support on the trading. So what are we sought after as Canadians, Deepak? And I could throw that to anybody. Are we sought after? Because obviously not our production costs. We don't compete against the Southern Hemisphere's production costs. Are we sought after for the quality, our know-how, our culture, or just availability right now? And if so,
it's just availability, Nico. I think it's, if you're looking to get, kilos en masse, Colombia had various legislations, that weren't enacted until very recently to allow flower export. And flower was the largest segment of international, trade with respect to medical cannabis. So, there's been various quirks in different countries' legislation that hasn't permitted en masse exports. But really, if you're looking for consistent 500, 600, 800 kilos a month on a month-over-month basis, Canada was a real good place to be able to fulfill demand. That is changing, and that is changing very quickly. And a number of countries are starting to really pick up and get a handle on these things. And that's why I meant if we want to be a leader, we've got to have a lot of commitment, not just from industry, but also from government to making this successful.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to say something there.
Go for it, Sean. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was saying, it's interesting you should say that, because I agree that like the amount of product that was available in 2022 and in 2021, I find we're starting to see it slowly shrink in volume due to the fact that they're just no longer playing in the field. So there was a long period of time there where people were growing product either for someone or hoping to find someone or find a SKU for it, and it seemed like they would get caught holding the hot potato. And once they're caught with it, and there's no one that can take it anymore, it gets sold on an exchange of some sort, and there's a bid go out on it, and it gets sold that way. And I think I'm noticing it now in the Israeli market, in the sense that the product they're receiving, the product that they've come to love, is a product that was provided from a different style of growing, more machine style trimming, more processed look. They're after a processed look for the most part, I found. And there was a lot of that product available. Now when you're trying to supply and you're trying to show hand trimmed product, they say, no, we don't like hand trimmed. It doesn't look processed. We need it, to look processed. And so, but those lots are now shrunk because of just that wheat is no longer available. The people that are around right now growing in Canada are strong growers, and they're providing a product that has a shelf space or has a market for it. And they're not just growing something and then trying to find a spot for it. There's a purpose to the growers that are around right now, I find, in Canada that I've been talking to. And I think you're seeing those big lots really getting smaller and smaller as they come available.
Well, that's not a bad thing either, because that's a question that I want to throw back to you, Sean, in a bit. I just want to get to a question from the audience. And please, anybody raise your hand. But I think, Chad, you somewhat answered this a little bit last time. But how do you see having an international brand as an asset? And seeing as you can't really advertise in Canada, is this a means of doing so? So for us, Chad, it's really difficult to advertise besides your name, and there's all kinds of rules. And I believe you kind of fall into the same. But so is having an international brand an asset? So I'd like to throw it to Chad, because he's been playing in that field longest, but then go back to Sean on this, because I know you deal with multiple different growers, and so does Tanner. Oh,
Are you on mute?
we don't have audio.
Sorry.
Yes, perfect.
So basically, I don't think so. There's not much recognition in the European market for Canadian brands or US brands, just as an example. A lot of the people don't know the producers. A lot of people aren't familiar with the producers. So having a specific brand, I don't think is going to help you at the end of the day. What they do resonate with and what they do have reference to is the genetics themselves. Depends on how you, as a brand in your country, pump or push those genetics. And that's kind of what consumers on the European side would resonate with. Like there's specific varieties like Gorilla Glue number 4, which is kind of old school and it's not even in the market anymore in Canada, I would assume. But things like that are really popular in the European market just because of how well it was pushed back in the day. So that's kind of how I see it, and that's what we take from the market at the moment.
So Tanner, I know that in Australia you're pushing your daily grape. Are you still pushing the same kind of brand and all that? Does that actually have an impact for moving product?
Yeah, well, time will tell. We are branded on the jars in Australia. We are talking about, or at least our company is shown there. So, I mean, at that point, it then lands onto the Australian patient to say, okay, who are these guys? And then they have to go searching for us, because we certainly cannot tell them anything about ourselves via Australian regulation or promote anything about our company. So, we're going on load 5 here right now, and probably month 4 or as many months, month 4 or 5, and so far so good as far as pull and distribution of the strains. We haven't been able to get enough volume in there fast enough over this last 5 months, because full disclosure, we're still getting into the groove of it. There's I have a Gantt chart that my right hand COO Katrina did up, just taking the kind of worst case amount of days to get a load into that market in Australia, and it's about 60 days. It can be about 60 days roughly between import permit, export permit, then you got to get a phytosanitary. Okay, so actually, I don't think we talked about this on our last call. I'm just going to touch on this right now. Canadian Food Inspection Agency gets involved in export. So that's
Yeah.
another element. So just when you're hopping along and as a cannabis company and you're like, wow, Health Canada and CRA really love me, and you go to export, well, now you get to invite the CFIA into your home. And well, why? Why would the Canadian Food Inspection Agency care about cannabis? Well, they don't. They care about the bugs that might be in your cannabis. So they come and they do what's called a phytosanitary or a plant sanitary inspection, and to see if it's clean, and they look for bugs in your product. So that adds another 2 weeks, right? So you've got three government agencies involved at this time, and they all say, you say, well, how quick do I get my export permit? Well, 1 to 2 weeks. How quick do I get my import permit? 1 to 2 weeks. How quick does my phytosanitary get done? 1 to 2 weeks. So now we're at a month and a half, and if it's all congruent, so I think we're just about there into a groove. It's a nice problem to be running out of product, but it's also not a good thing either, because you want to try to be available for your consumers, for the patients in this case, and we're servicing a patient market. So our name is on the bottle, so we wear that, right? It's us.
Okay.
It's us together with our partner over there. It's Stewart Farms and our distributor that is either succeeding in keeping supply or failing in keeping supply. So you get to wear the good and you get to wear the bad. But I'd rather have our name on it and have the extra pressure.
Mm-hmm. They have the extra pressure. That's fantastic.
I don't even know
So
what your
Sean,
question was, but phytosanitary.
no, you answered the question. That's great. So Sean, you guys operate as more of a co-op, and it's all EastCann, or do you identify your individual partners that you have?
So we have a few portfolios. So we're EastCann, we're Atlantic Can, which is the EU GMP facility, and we're partners with Origin Coast in Cape Breton. And then we have, I would say, 30 satellite micros that would grow for our market as well. So between all of us, we're all within the same genetics, except for Atlantic Can, because they already have a German, they're supplying Germany already, and we've only been in here about 7 days, and it's so great to come into a facility that has such a tight program, and this is EU GMP. We're GMP, but EU GMP is like a whole different animal. And it's just so wild, and it's good because everybody has to be good at their job in these facilities in order to get to the finish line. And from the growing, packaging, everything that goes along with it, that came when we joined with Atlantic Can. It blows my mind that's how structured it has to be, and how things go and how things are. It's not a game that everybody can play in, but it's definitely exciting for sure. I don't know if I was answering the question.
I totally agree. Yeah, and actually, I'm going to have a follow-up, but I know what you mean about these standards, because I was very fortunate to be able to visit Chad just last week, and their EU GMP, and I have to say there is a difference between a purpose-built EU GMP facility and a facility that was built in Canada that ended up receiving EU GMP afterwards, and all the different changes. You can tell the difference in the flow, and you're right, Sean, when it's done right, I didn't find it that much of a hindrance. However, I didn't deal with the paperwork. I was working with Chad and looking at all the product. So, Sean, on that topic of the complexities of participating in that, do you feel that it's a benefit for smaller growers? What technically you guys are doing with your 30 micros, is it beneficial for them to work together to get economy of scales and being able to attain that market, or can they just do it on their own?
Well, That's a great question. They kind of are. They're in contact with each other. We're always, back and forthing with each other, and it really is like, a bunch of strong growers that are putting their input in everything. They're growing in cocoa. Like if one of these, a lot of times the reason why we built the relationship was back when they had a beautiful product, but guess what they didn't have was a shelf space for it or a place to sell it. So we would take that product, we would export it, then give them a strain that we are running actively because they're great growers, and then they'll grow that strain, and there we go. We're off to the races with that grower. Now that grower would be like, hey, you ever think about maybe switching to cocoa from rockwool? Well, yeah, I haven't. Well, we got lots of support there. Let's give it a try. And they're confident enough, a lot of these growers, to make some moves and do some things to accommodate certain markets and provide the part. And that's how those relationships came. So really, they are typically a co-op in the sense that we're all supplying the same area. We're just using the product and splitting it up differently amongst the growers, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so
some growers
there's
will
definitely
get
some
used to
benefits.
growing.
Yeah. And I've heard that some of the buyers, also the European buyers, they're starting to be a little bit like Canadians, where they want variety and diversity of genetics. So having to tap into multiple different grows would make it a little bit easier to participate in those markets, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I think it's definitely, the Australian market definitely is getting and now in the German market, they're educated. They're finding what they want. They're asking for specific genetics, seeing if you can find it. Hey, do you have a line on this? They really like this here. Yeah, it's cool, man. It's a good time to be in the space for sure.
We just received another question. Thank you from the audience here. So to all the panelists, are there other countries you're looking to enter that you're currently not exporting to? So I'd like Deepak to kind of finish off with that comment, because he might have more insight on new regulations coming out. So maybe we start with Chad. How are you positioning your products differently to enter different countries? Is there something you guys are doing differently? We've talked about Germany, a little bit of Israel and Australia. What other hot markets should we be looking into?
It's difficult to say off the top of my head what markets are out there, but there are countries like Poland, and Spain is obviously another one. And it's just about positioning yourself in the country, right? I mean, we need to find the right people on the ground, and to be able to do that, we need to put people on the ground. So we have multiple salespeople all over the world in specific countries pushing our product, just opening doors. And beyond that, I'm not sure what the right approach is, but that's basically how we're approaching it. As far as we are now, we've really been focusing mostly on the German market, the Israeli market, and the Australian market. So beyond that, we haven't pushed product anywhere just yet, but we are obviously trying to tap into all the European countries where it is legal.
Excellent. Sean, are you looking at exploring other, now that you got EU GMP partners that must have opened up a few doors?
We want to go to all of them. No, it's no, exactly. Poland is definitely on the radar. New Zealand is on the radar for sure. We do some we partner with some a soft gel OSG in Alberta, and they make soft gels for us, and we put 10/10s and 5/5s, and that's in Bermuda and Bahamas for their medical platform there. And then so we're like, just as we kind of, like you're saying, it takes so long to get an inroad in. You're working towards things. There's only so far, you can only go so fast, and you can only kind of pick away at it, and eventually you've made your way, type of thing.
So thank you for that. Tanner, how I know that you're dealing mostly with Australia right now, but are you looking at other countries, and how are you positioning your product? Are you positioning it differently? Are we just saying, hey, it's Canadian product? But what about Chad on the call? He's not Canadian product. So how are we positioning this product differently on the open market?
Yeah, well, on the positioning, if it's dried flour, the product positions itself. It starts with the name, and then the name of the genetic.
Yeah.
As Chad was saying earlier, maybe they are a Gorilla Glue fan. In our case, our two lead strains are Daily Grape and Brittany's Frozen Lemons. So we've kind of got a fruit basket going on, and our lemon is a lemon, and our grape is a grape. So the offering is the positioning. So yeah, but I mean, like Sean, the New Zealand market is interesting because it's hope maybe shipping routes could be shared somewhat, right? So I'm maybe having a slight kick of the can, having a look at New Zealand, what's going on there. Would that make any sense on our end? We are, I don't have, I don't have 30. I don't have the scale that Sean has. We are significantly smaller. So we really can't look at a lot of countries from a weed perspective right now. I've got 100,000 square foot building I could expand rooms into, but you need the capex to build those rooms out as well. So hopefully we can ramp up production over time, and also slowly expand our partnership base. But our 2.0 products, our bath bombs, a little bit hard to ship overseas, but our salt soaks, we've got this unique offerings of wellness products, pain creams that are really popular here in Canada. That's something that we could look at scaling to multiple different countries, because we manufacture those products and we don't have to wait for them to grow, and I don't have to expand canopy space. So that's particular interest from Stewart Farms perspective is how do we get these Canadian leading wellness products into these other countries, and I don't see most of our products in most of these international markets. So we have a real opportunity there. We just need to ramp it up.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting, and you are in a very good position for that. You're right, because of all your wellness products and how much work you've done. I've been following you guys for a long time, so kudos on that. It's not just on your website what you say that it's wellness. You guys do truly believe in it and do it. So thank you for that.
Little plug here, Nico. We got our new Arctic Heat cream launching. This is 120 gram muscle cream.
Beautiful.
And it's a true cream. If you guys can see here, it's
Yes.
very moisturizing, and it's 1,000 milligrams balanced, right? So just as an example, outside we've been talking about flour this whole time, but Sean brought up soft gels. There's a whole other universe of 2.0 products that we have the advantage of looking at here in Canada. And as soon as the word gets out that why bother with icy hot when you can feel the Arctic heat, the entire community.
I love it. I just don't want another picture of you in a bathtub, Tanner. Just no more pictures of you in a bathtub. So
I'm sending one now.
Deepak,
That might be post-bath.
Yeah, exactly. It's post-bath. So Deepak, we've mentioned a few countries. Any insight on new countries of places we should be looking at? And also, just to piggyback on Tanner's last comment, are we ahead of most countries for 2.0 products? Is this something that we should be looking at? Because I think it's a very important and interesting market segment.
Yeah, for sure. So happy to chat about both of those. I think with respect to secondary products, there's some really interesting markets for them. I think Australia is a really, really good market for cannabis 2.0 products. We've seen vapes now become really popular as a product that is imported and being exported to a significant extent from Canada. But it really, really depends on which market that you're after and what that market allows. For example, in Germany, it would be wonderful to have our 2.0 products, but given existing legislation, nothing is really permitted. I mean, vapes will soon be coming onto the medical market in Germany, but it's been a very slow rollout process. It's taken over 5 years of legislation to change and people to push barriers to be able to allow for that. So I think if, the bottom line is if you're looking to set up a business or you're setting up to cater to international markets, really positioning the product and what exactly it is that you're going to be selling and which market you're going to be targeting is critical and essential, because there's a whole bunch of regulatory barriers in some cases that come along with that. So, the very same vapes that you could sell into Australia, you probably wouldn't be able to sell into Germany as an example. So really, really important to keep your end market in mind and what it is that you're targeting. I think Sean earlier mentioned about Israel, talking about the difference between Israel and Germany. Israel loves a non-irradiated product, whereas in Germany, pharmacists love irradiated products. So it's really, it can really be opposite depending on the market that you're looking at. Like, Israel wouldn't touch irradiated product. That just wouldn't fly. Whereas in Germany, you'll have the opposite problem. You'll have pharmacists, challenging you on how you got around the microbial. So I think it's very important to keep your target markets in mind. I would also say, there's a lot of noise around new countries coming online, and I think the industry's been through this quite a bit already, getting excited too early before a market actually develops. So sure, I think Chad mentioned countries like Spain and Poland really picking up, and I think both of those countries are viable opportunities for increasing supply. I think the United Kingdom is really going to pick up with respect to medical products being sold there and how much medical cannabis is actually being distributed in that market. France came out with a tender recently for CBD products that Little Green Pharma ended up winning out of Australia. So there's some really cool things happening on the international stage. It's just a matter of figuring out what you need to do and which markets you're going to be servicing. Because I can say from a Canadian perspective, we've seen people try to focus on everything and where that's landed them in. So you don't want to fall into the same trap again. You want to be very, very focused on what market you're servicing and what product there and you'll be servicing.
Very strategic approach. Thank you for that, Deepak. We actually have another question from the audience, which is fantastic. So I'm going to throw it to the Canadians first and then Chad. So have you heard of quality issues with products shipped from Canada? We have heard as much as 20% of product shipped is lost due to issues with quality. So I assume this is from GACP-ish to a GMP. So have you had some of these issues, Sean, or how, do you control it on your end?
That's an interesting question, because you can send a batch to, like, for instance, for Israel, the person that's buying it watches it being packaged real time, and then he also watches it being packaged real time there. He comes here specifically to watch it get loaded in his silver bags, and he oversees it. So there's no gray area there, because there is stories of gray area there where so we had to destroy this. There was hair in it. We have to do this with this. There's reasons for it, and you're really left. There's not much you can do about it. One of the big things is too, though, is it's just like any of these cannabis products. If you're doing like 10 grams, 3.5 grams, you're gonna go through the lot, and there is going to be a product that doesn't end up getting used in those formats. So it's a good question about that. As far as percentages go, I'm not too sure, but I do think that definitely there's always going to be that leftover, but usually it's priced into the cost of everything, and they include that in the price.
Okay. Thank you. Tanner, have you seen that? I know you're dealing with Australia. Have you seen some of that, or do you do final packaging right from your facility and they take what it is?
Yeah, so I have just heard or seen random issues in the Australian market, and I can't tell you if it's from Canada or the domestic market, because there are domestic suppliers there. I've just seen on Reddit, patients, opening up weed that they weren't happy with or what have you. So I've through hearsay, I've heard there's, been some, certain suppliers getting mold issues or botrytis in their in their flower over there. I personally, we haven't experienced it. What I can speak to from a curation perspective, I suppose, when we're selecting our cannabis to go to Australia, we're on the opposite end of the spectrum. We are not sending, what we're not going to sell in Canada to Australia. We're sending. Actually, we've gone the other way. We've created, I would say, seemingly more stringent specifications based on size and weight of the buds. We've gone, I think in a good direction, saying, this is no buds, no micro buds are going in the jar. This is our limit on the size of bud goes in the jar, and this is the percentage of big buds to smaller buds in the jar. So that's actually left us with a particular amount of cannabis that we have to keep here domestically, and either we have to mill it and we'll put it into
specific standards. So specific standards, and the more rigorous you are, the less issues you'll have down the line. So kind of what I'm getting at is really have clear understanding of what your buyer is looking for, and really try to sort, grade, and provide what it is instead of just pure mixed bulk. I just want to, sorry to cut you off, Tanner. We just have a few seconds left. I just want to get Chad's input on that question. Is this a big issue? You're dealing from an EU GMP certified facility. You're sending to GMP sites. Are you seeing some of these issues that we've heard in Canada? And again, these are, we've heard up to 20% of issues on lots.
I have heard some talk. I mean, there's certain things going around that there's some manufacturers that are sending product in bulk that isn't fully processed to other facilities where it needs to be further processed, and because of the conditions that the flower is sent in, it has turned into a bit of a bad product. That's definitely been something that people have talked about, and I think there's a lot of Canadian producers that I've heard about that went the opposite direction of what Tanner just explained. It might have been a couple of years ago, but basically what they were doing was selling their best flower, their biggest flower in the domestic market in Canada, and sending all of their smalls and all their lesser quality product into markets like Israel, and those companies got a really bad rap, and that was definitely going around. But I think the percentages that you're talking about speaks more to the people that are GMP washing flower, where, like I explained, It doesn't get fully processed in the facility where it's manufactured, and then it gets further processed later on. And to be able to do that, you need to send wet flour across the country, it's just a recipe for disaster, and it's actually unethical in my perspective. But some people are just doing what they have to get into the market there.
Excellent last comment, Chad. Thank you very much. This is our time. I really appreciate all the panelists and the questions from the audience. Thank you very much. So a big thank you to our panelists, Deepak, Sean, Tanner, and Chad, for contributing for the second time now on this important topic, and CANNA for organizing these CANNAtalk events and to keep the growing conversation going. So to everybody, please make sure that you subscribe to the CANNA newsletter at www.canna.ca/CANNAtalk, and you'll get all the updates, all the talks, the summaries of our talks, and some extra snippets. And then you can stay connected with everybody that we've talked to on the panels. So thank you once again, everybody. Have a good rest of your evening, day. And I know that the time zones are all over the place. Thank you very much. Have a great night, everybody.
Cheers, gentlemen. Have a good one.
You guys have a great evening.